A particularly troubling aspect of Common Core of the whole scheme is the connection to collection of enormous amounts of student data and sharing that data. And we've talked about the progressive era and the progressive mindset, which is that you have to be able to have experts in control, and if experts are in control, they need to have data. They cannot make these decisions for the economy, for the planned economy, unless they have data. And this is what Arne Duncan said about data. He said, hopefully, actually this was ungrammatical, but that's okay. Hopefully someday we can track children from preschool to high school and from high school to college and college to career. We want to see more states build comprehensive systems that track students from pre-K through college and then link school data to workforce data. We want to know whether Johnny participated in an early learning program and then completed college on time, and whether those things have any bearing on his earnings as an adult. Now, if we're going to know all that about Johnny, we have to know everything there is to know about Johnny, from his birth through his career. So the essential fact here is that you've got a captive audience of public school students, and you can get all kinds of data from them. And as we'll learn later on today, this could bleed over into private school and homeschool students as well. The idea is to collect and create all of these massive student databases and then connect the data so that we can know everything that there is to know about a child all around. I think in Tennessee, the Tennessee Department of Education calls it the 360-degree view of the child. Now, the problem from Arne Duncan's point of view is that there is a federal statute that prohibits the federal government from maintaining a national student database. So what to do about that? Well, the way you get around that is that you incentivize the states to build the databases, and you make them identical so that they can be shared. And this, to be fair, predates the Obama administration. It started pretty much in the modern era, 2002, with a grant program, a state longitudinal database data system grant program. The most recent iterations were in the stimulus bill in 2009, when in order to access the state fiscal stabilization fund, a state had to agree to enhance its student data system. And then in the Race to the Top grant, that was one of the things that states had to agree to do, was to enhance their state longitudinal database. Now, what kinds of data are we talking about? According to the National Education Data Model, we're really talking about over 400 data points on each child. Now, that's not mandated, that's recommended, but we're going in that direction. Over 400 data points, and this would include things such as healthcare history, family income range, disciplinary history, voting status, religious affiliation. Pretty much, if it has to do with your child, it's relevant to the education. Now, is this connected with Common Core? Yes, it is, and the most direct connection is through the two consortia, the testing consortia, PARC and Smarter Balanced. Each of those two consortia has a cooperative agreement with the United States Department of Education that says the U.S. Department will be given ongoing access on an ongoing basis to all of the data that these consortia collect through the testing. So it will go directly to Washington. Now, once and they will be using it for research, for unspecified research. They love research. And parents won't be allowed to opt out of that because they won't even know what's happening. Now, but we're told that we don't need to worry about this because all of this will comply with federal student privacy law, with the FERPA law. But as Bill mentioned earlier, that law essentially has been gutted by regulation. Federal student privacy law means nothing. If your state Department of Education tells you we comply with FERPA, that means nothing. That is no protection at all. Now, even for the states that have had the good sense so far to opt out of the Common Core, the two consortia, PARC or Smarter Balanced, they're not home free. This doesn't mean that their data is going to be protected from the federal government, because as we hear from people who are in states who are not in Common Core, the U.S. Department is being increasingly aggressive in trying to get personally identifiable student data through other grants, school improvement grants, this kind of thing. And once they get it, then they want to share it and can share it under the new FERPA regulations with literally anyone in the world, as long as they use the correct enabling language. It can go to the Department of Labor, to the Department of Health and Human Services, to, I don't know, IRS. One aspect of this, one illustration of what they want to do with it is something called the Workforce Data Quality Initiative. This is sort of a joint venture between the U.S. Department of Education and the Department of Labor. And the idea here, it says, is the purpose is developing or improving state workforce data systems with individual level information, and enabling workforce data to be matched with education data. So student education data are to be shared to the extent possible with state and federal labor agencies to promote the goal of workforce development. Now, the U.S. Department of Education is supporting and funding a plethora of other programs designed to make data shareable across states. For one thing, when they got all of these grants to build the data systems, they all had to be identical. All the states are building them exactly the same way so that they can be shared. The U.S. Department is funding common education data standards to help states develop a common vocabulary for their data, so it makes it more shareable. It's funding something called Digital Passport, which will allow interstate sharing of data on students who move across state lines. It's funding something called the Assessment framework to allow for the transfer of assessment-related data across applications within a district, between a district and a state agency, and across state lines. So the federal government says, oh no, we are not creating a federal student database. A parish thought, we are not doing that. But everything that they are doing is designed to accomplish that, a de facto national student database. Now, another troubling initiative, which I won't spend a lot of time on because it doesn't apply to all states yet, it's In Bloom. This is a data collection facility that is funded, not to no one's surprise, by the Gates Foundation. And there are 8 pilot states. There used to be 9, and then Louisiana dropped out when the parents got wind of it. So according to its website, In Bloom was inspired by the vision of the Council of Chief State School Officers, which is one of the owners and developers of the Common Core, and intends to develop technology to support the implementation of the Common Core standards. Now, the idea is that they're going to develop this framework so that they can take data that's on all of these different locations and make it more easily accessible. Now, part of that is fine because part of that just means that teachers would have more access and parents would have more access, and that's all well and good. But the other thing they want to do is to make it available to vendors so that vendors can create personal education products for students. Now, In Bloom is careful to insist that it itself will not be sharing this data, that the data can only be shared by the state or the local districts or the state. But In Bloom's structure will make it much, much easier. And as one vendor CEO put it, this is going to be a huge win for us. Now, the U.S. Department of Education and state departments of education also tell us that there's nothing to worry about because all of this data is anonymized, that we take out the names, we just give a unique identifying number, that sort of thing. Well, in the first place, some of that's just simply not true. It's not going to be anonymized coming out of the testing consortia. And if you are going to find out how much Johnny is earning, you got to know who Johnny is. And in the second place, in the era of big data, there is simply no such thing as anonymization. When there are multiple or even hundreds of data points available on students, you can do data matching and you can find out almost instantaneously who you're talking about. And every time I speak on this, somebody from the audience comes up at the end who is an IT person and says, if they tell you that this is anonymous, they are lying to you. And there are many examples of being able to re-identify people, including there was in Kentucky 14 years ago, a researcher re-identified over 2,300 students who were supposedly anonymous on some testing, and this was 15 years ago, before they had all the data that we have now. So one scholar who has studied the problem has explained, he said, utility and privacy of data are 2 goals at war with one another. At least for useful databases, perfect anonymization is impossible. And the U.S. Department of Education wants this to be very, very useful. So where are we headed with it? Well, I'm just going to mention a couple of things, and then we need to go on to other people. One of the best things to look at where we're going with all this data collection is what is the U.S. Department of Education working on and writing about, okay? Now, one report that they're working on and that they wrote is this. It's called Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance. The idea is that, see, this is critical factors for success in the 21st century. So, to be educated in the 21st century means something completely different from being educated, in the 20th or the 19th or the 18th. But that you've got to have all these 21st century skills. So, one thing that they want to do is to measure things that how students react to frustration, to stress, to anxiety, to that sort of stuff. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can do that through physiological measurements, right? And how would you do that? Well, you could do it on page 44 of this report. You could do it through skin conductance sensors. You could do it through posture analysis. You could do it through EEG brain wave patterns. You could do it through eye tracking. And there's a whole chapter in this 100 and whatever page report about how you do that and how that will be beneficial if we know how students react, because this tells us something about the 360-degree view of the student. And there's about one paragraph in this report that talks about the appalling invasion of privacy that this would be. Most of the problems that they refer to are problems related to the fact that this is not practical for the classroom yet. So this is grit, tenacity, and perseverance. They also tie it directly to the Common Core standards, because they say that one of the Common Core standards in math is that you have to be able to persevere in struggling through problems. So if it's in the standards, it's going to have to be measured, right, at some point. Now, another U.S. Department report that came out about the same time is called Expanding Evidence Approaches for Learning in a Digital World. And this talks about the new craze for digital learning. And when I say digital learning, I'm not talking about that you get a video of a great professor teaching a lesson. I'm talking about, or you're just accessing text. I'm talking about these digital learning programs where it's a prompt, it's a stimulus response. Like something comes up on the screen and the child has to respond to it, and then that prompts something else, and the child responds to that, and on and on and on. Think Pavlov. So this is what this report is about, how wonderful that's all going to be. And that you have to be able to measure students' behaviors and dispositions. And every time a student responds to one of those prompts, it generates data on that student. It's called data exhaust. Now, the KTOR report, this was done by Office of Educational Technology, and Karen Kator is the head of it. It urges that this data exhaust be used to develop individual profiles on students, that it be shared with various institutions and other stakeholders who may have an interest, and this is a quote, for studying the non-cognitive aspects of 21st century skills, namely interpersonal skills such as communication, collaboration, and leadership, and intrapersonal skills such as persistence and self-regulation. So they also emphasize, this Department of Education, that the gathering of this extremely fine-grained information on students will help with the implementation of the Common Core standards, because after all, the Common Core standards do not emphasize knowledge, they emphasize skills, 21st century skills, all of these things. That's what Common Core is, and that's what they say they want to be able to measure. About a year ago, the U.S. Department of Education hosted a conference called Datapalooza. And they invited all of these vendors to come and talk about all their great digital products. And one CEO of an ed vendor said, "We are collecting billions of records of data, pulling data from everywhere, tens of thousands of places. This data," he said, "will help students develop the 21st century skills that the government has determined that they need." And how will these 21st century skills, how are they being promoted in the classroom? This is what he said: Common Core is the glue that ties everything together. Now, I haven't even mentioned the ever-present problem of data security. Obviously, this data is going to be hacked. It is a huge target. student data, family financial data, student social security numbers, all that's a huge target, and it already is being hacked. But as serious as this problem is, to me, the deeper problem is that the government has deemed our children to be as little machines to be programmed or as human capital to be exploited. Progressives have yearned to do this for over a decade, and now they have the technology to do it. And the Common Core standards, which diminish academic knowledge in favor of 21st century skills, are the passport to the progressive future. Thank you.